Hi, I'm back. Hi. Yes, I'm Alison Arngrim. This is the Alison Arngrim Show. Okay, some of you may remember me as Evil Nellie Olson from Little House on the Prairie, but tonight I'm Alison Arngrim, and this is the Alison Arngrim Show. And here on the Alison Arngrim Show, we talk about things that make you feel good, the TV shows and the movies that made us feel good, and the people who made them, and people who are doing things now to make the world a better and more interesting place. And yes, I have found two more people like that. So some of you know that pretty much every year now for a while, I go to the Cherry Blossom Festival, but not just any Cherry Blossom Festival. I go to the Marshfield, Missouri Cherry Blossom Festival. And people say, what the heck is that? It is the Cherry Blossom Festival. It's in Missouri. Now, not to be confused with Mansfield, Missouri, which is down the road, where Laura Ingalls Wilder and Almanza live, which is writing the books. Oddly, the same guy who runs Cherry Blossom Festival is now, of course, on the board of the Laura thing, because they're in the neighborhood. So this is really, honestly, surreal event, and in the best way possible. The first time I went, I was like, wait, what? You have a lot of history. There's presidential descendants. I was there when there was the John Ashcroft prayer breakfast, and then we had Lulu Roman from Hee Haw. And it's this combination of celebrities and history that when you first read the guest list, you go, and somebody put something in my drink, what is happening? And then you realize, no, this is real. Plus, you're like auctioning off cherry pies with Grover Cleveland's great-great-grandson. It's all of these things happen all at the same time in one place for several days in Missouri. And I'm going to go do it again with a whole bunch of people from Little House on the Prairie. But what we're also having is cherry blossoms also means First Ladies. And it is First Ladies Day is being celebrated this month on the 29th. And I don't know if you knew about this, but this is this huge thing where it's First Ladies Day going back to commemorating Martha Washington. And they're having a whole event. And there's actually a presidential descendants society and people who are descendants of First Ladies. And I have the infamous, at this point, Reverend Nicholas Inman, who runs the Cherry Blossom Festival. And I have I have to make sure I have the right number of great nephew of William McKinley, Mr. Massee McKinley, live here with me on the show. Welcome to the Alison Arngrim Show.
Thank you, Alison.
This is what, so Nicholas, this event, I mean, the number of things that you do, how you as one single human being manage to do all of the different things that you do and run all the charities that you do, I do not know. But this Cherry Blossom Festival in Missouri, if I recall, I remember that when you started this, you didn't actually have any cherry trees.
No, that's correct. So after high school, I'd spent some time in Washington, D.C. And of course, after you've grown up in a small town, you kind of miss being in one. So I was homesick and decided I needed to come back. And when I did, being a little fickle about it, I decided, why did I leave? So I thought, we'll just plant cherry blossom trees in Marshfield and have the best of both worlds. And that's kind of how it started. And you're right, there wasn't a cherry blossom tree one, but now we have cherry blossom trees all over, although they've usually bloomed by cherry blossom time. So,
conveniently. Well, I said it's like you have no cherry blossoms. Technicality. We're having a festival.
right.
And your fascination with history, you always have some presidential descendants at these events, whether it's Washington, Lincoln, whoever, and that you eventually you're going to have like one from every single presidential family. You've had nearly everyone.
That's the hope. Yes, that's right.
How did this fascination with this kind of history start? I mean, you've run for office, you've done everything, you've been an alderman, you've done everything. How did the fascination with history and presidential history particularly get started?
Well, I always say I'm a bit of a history nerd, I guess. But I guess you could rewind to when I was in the fourth grade. President George H.W. Bush and his wife Laura visited Marshfield for our 4th of July celebration. We have the oldest 4th of July celebration west of the Mississippi River. And so the president visited. And as a little boy, I just absorbed every moment of that. That was fascinating to me that the leader of the free world was coming to Marshfield, the middle of nowhere. And so I can remember being in the parade that day. It was hot. It was crazy. There's 6,000 people in our town. So to have 10,000 people on the courthouse lawn was just crazy. And the president and first lady were in a reviewing stand watching the parade. And I was with a group and we were walking by the reviewing stand. And I thought to myself, I'm going to yell out and wave at Barbara Bush. And then I thought, no, everybody will think I'm crazy. But I did it anyways. And from that moment, she pointed at me and waved, and I could have just melted in the middle of the street. And from then on, I was kind of hooked on history. For the first time, I took notice with the news to what the president and the first lady were doing. I felt connected to them. They'd been to our town. And that really, I think, started me down the history path.
Wow. Okay, so it's that personal touch, but this is great. So, for National First Ladies Day is an actual thing, and starting on April 29th, and I will be there for that. There's like a tea and everything at the event, and at the kickoff ceremony is in Marshfield. It's going to be there at the school where I'm signing autographs. Another part of the day, and you've got someone from everyone here. Okay, so you have Massee McKinley, the great nephew Willie McKinley, Mary Jean Eisenhower, Clifton Truman Daniel, Patricia M. Taft, Jennifer Coolidge, Sales Harville, and on and on and on. You've Margaret Hayes Clark. You're going to have the 135th Army Band Brass Ensemble to
That's
kick this whole
right.
thing off.
And we're excited about all those people. Unfortunately, Clifton Truman Daniel's not going to be able to join us. He's been in Israel representing the Truman family, but we will have a great roster of presidential descendants, and many, like Massee, are participating in the ceremony. In fact, Massee singing. So I'll give you a little preview of that.
Massee, you're singing. So now you're a twofer, because you're not also the great nephew William McKinley. You're also with on your mother's side. It's Grover Cleveland. You're related to President Cleveland as well. So you're a bonus.
That's exactly right. And what's so amazing about that, Alison, is they served side by side. Grover Cleveland attended William McKinley's inauguration, and we didn't know, of course, the families didn't know each other at the time, back then. But when my parents married, that's when the two families came together, and I realized that I was related to both William McKinley and Grover Cleveland. So William McKinley was the 25th, and Grover Cleveland was the 22nd and the 24th U.S. president. So,
what is that like? So you knew this growing up. We're just talking to a producer who relatively later in life found out that he's descended from one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. But you knew this as a child growing up, that you were descended from a president.
I did, Alison. My father was a longtime history teacher, and we talked about things at the breakfast table. And one day he said, we just want to let you know that you're related to two U.S. presidents. And he said, but I want you to know, don't let that go to your head, because any young man or any young woman can become president. And he said, you have a solemn duty to make sure that their service is recognized, but don't take it to your head, and make sure that you boast about it. Be grateful and thankful for that lineage.
Well, and as it's somewhat of a duty, now you kind of have a reputation to hold up. You kind of have to, hold up the name. So, but that's very cool. So what is that like then, growing up, knowing, and then being, obviously, again, it's the history buffs here, your dad's professor, being into history and going, wait, I'm actually part of it as well. What is that like?
Alison, I've always loved history as well. I mean, with a dad that was a history teacher growing up, we learned about everything and talked about everything, and went to all types of, family vacations that centered on, the national parks and the presidential libraries and sites in Washington, D.C. So, going to the actual sites, McKinley site and Grover Cleveland site, was pretty surreal for me, because I got a chance to walk on that holy ground, so to speak, where they stood and where they lived each and every day. So it's a very, very special thing to have that in my life, for sure.
Fantastic. And then we've been talking about the roles of First Lady. It's interesting. The more I've been reading about it, they said, well, it's not really an elected position, but there's still a job. Everyone who's been First Lady has had to work, has go, well, you're First Lady, here's the list of things that you're going to be doing now. And that many of them do campaign with their husbands, because they know that when they get in, they're going to be going to work. It's not like, oh, good, I'm married to the president, I'm going to leave now and get, you get right. Tasks. And so it was taken very seriously. And I don't know, I mean, down the road, as we finally wind up having female presidents, I guess, the first gentleman's going to be throw that tea party. It's, going to happen. But it has always been a job. And these women have had to do things, some of them seemingly on the surface, the Tea Party ribbon cutting, but many of them very involved politically and socially. And McKinley was also. But I was reading about Ida McKinley was the person. She had a very hard life. I went to read it and I said, "Oh dear, I'm 2 paragraphs in and everyone's dead." I mean, she
Right.
lost 2 children, and of course, President McKinley, one of our few presidents, was assassinated, and then
Exactly.
her brother died tragically, was murdered.
That's
So
right.
that's a really rough life for a first lady.
Absolutely. She, Allison, she had the distinction of being one of the very few first ladies back in that particular time frame to be well educated too. I mean, she was educated in Europe and had the best of an education and certainly was well prepared for that position. But like you said, even coming from a family of influence and affluence, she definitely had a very hard life because she was diagnosed with epilepsy early on in her life. And William McKinley was one of the best husbands that she could ever have, Allison, because he took care of her and made sure that she was with him at every step of the way, throughout his presidency. And the custom is for the president not to sit next to the first lady during a state dinner, but she actually sat beside him because sometimes she might have an epileptic seizure during the course of the meal, and he would just very calmly place a napkin over her face, let her compose, come to, and then when you take the napkin away, and things would be normal. And the cabinet and the guests just didn't even pay any attention to that because they knew how devoted William McKinley was to his wife.
Well, it's
So
a big deal. I
incredible.
mean, medical technology wasn't what it is now. The understanding that
Right.
there was only so much they could do. People now have all sorts of medications they can go on. There wasn't much they could do.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And not to mention, like you said, the loss of both daughters, and then of course the loss of her husband. And I think her legacy, Allison, is really and truly the McKinley Monument and Memorial, which is the library there in Canton, Ohio, now today. If you've never been, you should go because it is quite an epic statue, and it really memorializes and honors President McKinley's legacy in life.
And from what I've read, they were really kind of a love match. I mean, you hear about
They
some
were.
presidents. And back in the day, people like, "Oh, you're going to go marry the daughter of so and so in town." It's like, who? But people did. But
Yeah,
I was reading that she was very pretty. There were some pictures of
she
she
was
was quite
beautiful.
attractive and stunning, and they met like through normal social circles and fell in love. This
That's
was
right.
actually a love match. She was very
That's
happy in her
exactly
marriage.
right. In fact, Allison, they met, in the town there in Canton. She was working as a teller at her father's bank, and
Again, unusual, very unusual for a woman back then.
that's right. And then, William McKinley had an account with the bank. So he went in that day and fell in love with her. And, she was kind of apprehensive at first because she said, this is a young guy. He just has come back from the Civil War. And I'm just kind of leery about whether or not, this is somebody that I want to date. And of course, her parents had, a good bit of influence on who she would choose to become her husband because they wanted to be sure that she was going to be taken care of. Well,
And this is the 1800s. This isn't you just run out and meet somebody on
that's
Facebook and get
right.
married. This is
That's
your parents are
exactly
like,
right.
Here's who you're marrying."
That's right. But little did they know, Allison, that William McKinley not only would be a wonderful husband, but a great provider and a great strength for her throughout her life as we know it because of all the sadness that it involved. But the death of both daughters and of course the death of William McKinley. So what an incredible story. And a lot of people don't know this too, Allison. William McKinley was the last Civil War president. He was the very last Civil War president. He served under both Garfield and Hayes during the Civil War. And I've always said this, had it not been for Rutherford B. Hayes and his mentorship of William McKinley, I really don't think William McKinley would have ever run for Congress
wow.
or governor or become the United States president. I think that influence was great, and the legacy and the mentorship and really the Christian fellowship that they shared really had a really great influence on his life for sure.
And do you think do most descendants of presidents do they know this much about their ancestors? I mean, I know I would be excited. They say, if it's your ancestors, I'd like, what? I mean, my mom was Gumby, and I'm excited. So I think if I was related to a president of the United States, I would read up. How many would you say people who are in this group descendants are up on every detail of their ancestors' life? Is it something they learn about as children or later?
That's a very, very good question, Allison. And I think the majority of them learn later in life. I have a dear friend, Ulysses Grant Dietz. He always knew that he was, related to someone great and famous, but really and truly, he didn't accept that fact until later in life. And he realized what a great, influence and what an influential person. I mean, he won the Civil War for the United States, and we have the great nation that we have today because of his patriotism and his leadership, and then too his presidential leadership. So I think there's a combination of both. I'm grateful, Allison, that my dad gave me that opportunity to learn early in my life, because I think it's given me an opportunity to really dedicate making sure that a lot of people are aware of who Grover Cleveland and William McKinley are, because as you well know, they're not the most famous of the presidents, and they're most times they're often overlooked. Although I do think that both of them have gotten a lot of attention lately. Several books have been written in recent years, and I think they've become more appreciated. So I definitely think by knowing about them earlier in my life, it's given me an opportunity to dedicate my life in order to, cherish that memory and cherish their leadership and their legacy for sure.
Well, I think it's true. I think even when we hear children, as children, you hear something, but you don't really appreciate it until you're older and understand it. But yeah, I see what you mean. There obviously some presidents get movies made about them and Netflix specials. But in hearing about the tragedies of Ida's life and all things, so I think they do need a Netflix miniseries. And I see Nicholas taking notes. He's going to go produce it like tomorrow. So so, Nicholas, this group, I mean, this is a national thing. These people who are in this group of presidential descendants are willing to speak and do education really all over the country, not just in Marshfield with the marching band. This is
Right.
a thing that's available.
Yes, that's right. The National Commission is made up of not only presidential historians, but presidential descendants and many others who are involved and interested in the First Ladies. And I'm so glad you emphasized that, because as a commission, we really feel that civics is a huge part of the component of First Ladies Day. We want to see classrooms across America incorporate, a lesson plan that has to do with the First Ladies leading up to First Ladies Day each year, so that descendants can go and speak in schools and presidential historians and things to educate the public and another generation about the unsung First Ladies. There are so many, as you mentioned, who've had specials. You automatically think of Jackie Kennedy and Eleanor Roosevelt and Nancy Reagan. But there are so many, Lou Hoover, Ida McKinley, Grace Coolidge, that you might not just roll off the tip of your tongue, that we really want to see children educated about.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think personal touch, as I said, I did not know all this about Ida McKinley. And so I was like, whoa, that's a lot for a young woman to handle. And I think hearing more really about their personal lives and what it was like day to day as a human being living through that, being married to a president during tumultuous times in our country, having your husband be assassinated. This is big stuff.
Yeah.
I think for people to sort of feel a connection there, that it's not just a name and a little, black and white photo in a book.
It brings them to life, and it further interests you in their story. And Mrs. McKinley is a great example, but there have been several of the First Ladies who have made great sacrifices for the nation. Mary Todd Lincoln, Mrs. Kennedy, there's been so many of them that have had losses.
You had a play about a Mary Todd Lincoln that was performed at the Cherry Blossom Festival, where all what Mrs. Lincoln went through, because things that people don't even think of. It's like, okay, well, a lot of things that belong to the president don't belong to the president. They belong to the White House. So what actually happens to everybody's stuff? He dies and she turns around and they go, well, actually, yeah, your clothes. No, they were under that budget. You don't own anything. It's like,
Right.
no, wait, no, it's my stuff. Well, some of it's your stuff, but not really. What happens? It's if it's you write that down, they weren't expecting that to happen. The complications now for who is this woman now? If her husband's dead, now what's your job? What
Right. And Mrs. Lincoln's a great example of that. As you mentioned in the play, Dear Mrs. Lincoln, you really see it played out between she and Elizabeth Keckley, who was her dressmaker. And Mrs. Lincoln fell on financial times that were just really hard. And so she was clever in thinking, what do I have at my disposal? I'll sell some of these outfits. And so she starts trying to sell them. And what happens? They tear her apart in the press. And again, in this unelected, unpaid position that we find the first ladies in, everybody wants to throw stones and be critical, but Mrs. Lincoln was trying to survive.
Right. And
And
she didn't say,
it was
well, these
being
towns, these
created.
particular towns aren't yours because they're property. She's like, but then wait, if I wasn't getting paid and now I'm not the first lady because he's not president anymore because he's dead. So the vice president's taking him. So where do I live exactly since I gave up my house to come live in the White House?
Yep.
Suddenly the first lady is homeless, essentially.
Yes, and that's really when Congress began to have the discussion, what do we do with the living first ladies? And should they receive some kind of a pension? And so that really brought about a lot of that. And Mrs. Lincoln was instrumental in that. And so, of course, our current first ladies and former first ladies really have her to thank about some of those conversations because
So
they,
they are protected now. If you
yeah,
move out of if you sell your house because you're going to be living in the White House the next 4 years, so you don't actually have a place of residence other than the White House,
yeah,
and your only income is your husband who you live with, and then he dies in office, so you're not the first lady, and all the stuff you own is really property of the White House and the government because it's official capacity stuff. So first ladies now have some protection. There is some, but
they
they
do.
don't just kick them out of the curb, which they kind of did to Mrs. Lincoln.
Well, and yeah, exactly. When President Kennedy was assassinated, suddenly in modern times, we see a whole re-examination of the Secret Service and what former presidents and first ladies are allocated. And then all of a sudden, Mrs. Kennedy is just all kinds of surrounded by the press and the interest from the public. And so they had to do something to protect her. Now, in later years, I think she declined Secret Service, but there was a time, and I'm sure Mrs. Lincoln was the same way, people were hounding them all over. So they had to do something. But yeah, they have several perks now that they didn't used to have. And Mrs. Lincoln probably would have benefited greatly from some additional resources.
And this is the kind of stuff people don't think about. They go, "Oh, they're the first lady," and it's like, yeah, but then what happens? So no, I'm relieved to hear that because that's kind of scary that you could be in such a precarious position. A little frightening.
Right.
So what kind of things has the descendants? It's the official presidential descendants group. What kind of things have they been doing?
So, Alison, the Society of Presidential Descendants, we really have three main components that we focus on. First, we focus on civics, and we want to make sure kids understand that civics is an important part of the learning process because a lot of times, in this country, we kind of put that at the bottom of the list. But how important is that to know than to, civics is the bedrock of this country. And we want to make sure that kids have a greater understanding of that. So we dedicate ourselves once every year to go out to the schools on Civics Day in October of every year. And we go into the schools and we talk about civics and we talk about the importance of government and talk about the importance of being a good citizen and voting. So that's the first element that we have. Secondly, we have a book award that we give away every other year, and that book award focuses on presidential leadership. And we take books that have been culled over a period of 6 months, and we go through that, and we choose the very first best book. We give a $10,000 book prize for that, and then the second and the third, they both get $2,500 each for that. But that is another important part of the learning process because we feel like if people are dedicating themselves to writing books about presidential leadership, that will make them more interested to learn about the presidency, about the White House, about the role of the First Lady and how important that role is. Because truly, we think that the First Lady is really the locomotion for volunteerism and doing good, great community services in all parts of the country, Alison. And that's an important part of that role. In fact, I really and truly think it's probably one of the most important roles that they have, because a lot of times we get so inundated with politics and government that we don't focus on what's important in this life, and that's community service and volunteerism. And I think that's just an important element for the First Lady to espouse. Then thirdly, we focus on presidential research. We feel like we give the students at the high school level, at the college level, and then at the professional level an opportunity to actually go out and do presidential research, because a lot of times we know a lot about what goes on in the lives of the presidents and the first ladies, but we feel like that if they're given this opportunity to go out and research, and they're actually able to garner documents and papers from the presidential families in that process, they're able to gain more knowledge about what happened during that day and that time frame, and it gives them an even greater insight into what actually transpired during their presidency. So we feel like all three of those elements are so important to our whole reason for existing, because we feel like those things are necessary, and it's really been a successful time so far, Alison, because we've done we're coming up on the second book prize. We're coming up on the second Civics Day, which will actually be in October. And then we're coming up on, we have a gathering we have every other year as well, where all the presidential descendants come together. And we come together at a specific presidential site. The last one that we had was at Sagamore Hill, which was the home of Theodore Roosevelt. The next one will be Harry Truman's home in Independence, Missouri, and the presidential site there. And then
it's in Missouri. Nicholas.
Yeah, that's right. And then the third one will actually be at the LBJ Library in Austin, Texas. So we're excited. I mean, those are just a few examples of the things that we're working on. And it's all about the labor of love of volunteerism and community service and promoting the better good in history and in government, Alison, because I feel like, a lot of people, they do a lot of good things, but they don't focus on the true and goodness of what we can do that's important and good in this life. And we feel like those initiatives that we espouse will help to do that.
Well, fantastic. Well, and that's the thing, you're hanging out with Nicholas, who, now, Nicholas, you have many things. Okay, so you've got the Cherry Blossom Festival, which, as I said, is very surreal, because first it's like, there's some people from the Waltons and Little House on the Prairie and Hee Haw, and then there's the wait, what? And then there's all these historical panels on major historical events with people who were there or survivors of or descendants of the survivors of everything from the Titanic to Pearl Harbor to the Dred Scott decision, you name it. And then there's a whole organization about all of these things. Plus, you have multiple charities, things in Missouri that are helping people in Missouri that you are on the board. How many boards are you actually on now?
32.
Oh, stop it.
True. It's true.
Wow.
Yep.
What's the one? Was it Zuzu's house? I was reading about Zuzu's house.
Yes, Zuzu's house. Yeah.
Tell me about Zuzu's house.
So we have we are in rural America, the Mayberry of the USA. You'd think everybody knows everybody, and we're good to help our neighbors. But all of a sudden here in Marshfield, we developed a problem with homeless teens. And they were not just teens that we were finding on park benches spending the night. They were couch surfing. And so, my immediate thought was, we need to do something to solve this. These are our neighbors. These are people that we personally know. They're not just statistics. So I organized a board made up of many from the faith community. And I thought, the goal is we want all these kids to have a wonderful life, which of course made me think of the movie. So I called Carolyn Grimes, who played Zuzu.
She's at the Cherry Blossom Festival all the time.
Right. She was a Missourian, and she herself had been an orphan. So I called her and said, hey, this is what's happening here. I want to use this statement of mission as It's a Wonderful Life. Would you serve as the honorary chairwoman? And she said, what can I do to help? And then Janine Roos, who played in the movie, of course, had been a clinical psychologist. And so she served as a board member, an active board member for a long time, and helped come up with the counseling program for the house. And so we have been developing. We had one location here in town. We saw that we were going to outgrow that, so we bought another facility. Took an old church and we're converting it into a living facility. And in fact, while Carolyn has hit the festival this year, she's going to get to see the updates that's going on. But we have a couple things that we need to finish before we're ready to move in. But we're almost there, and it's going to be really exciting to see people receive help through Zuzu's house.
It's just one of the 32 things. And
Yeah.
then of course, good old Little House on the Prairie, Laura Ingalls Wilder, who's up the road there with her house.
Yeah,
You got involved there. And and I remember they were having trouble raising money, which is cuckoo, because you would think Laura Ingalls Wilder, it would be like Mark Twain's house, Edgar Allan Poe's, the big American author. And they were having a heck of a time. And then, you showed up, and now.
Well, it takes an army, and it's an honor to be the director of the Wilder home. We have a great staff, we have a great board, great volunteers, and they're all passionate about preserving the life story of one of America's greatest authors. And it amazes me constantly to see people come through the door from all over the world who are still touched, as you know personally, by Mrs. Wilder's life. And this is something we don't often speak about. Mrs. Wilder still receives fan mail.
Yep.
All these years, and that's one of my jobs, to answer Mrs. Wilder's fan mail.
Really?
To think that she still touches life.
I'm still receiving fan mail.
Yeah. Well, and Mrs. Wilder saved all of her fan mail. And so she has it by date. People will sometimes bring in letters and say, Mrs. Wilder wrote this. And there have been instances where we've been able to find their letter, and they'll become very emotional about that. They brought their grandchildren, they're telling the story, and they have my letter. It's kind of exciting. So it's the greatest job in the world to work at the Wilder home and see people, come to life when they see stories from their childhood. I just think that's amazing.
Well, I mean, I go to the Cherry Blossom Festival, and I think, well, that's enough work for anybody. Good heavens. But no, you're doing all of this as well. Now, so what can people expect if they get themselves over there on April 29th, since I'm going to be there? What can they expect from that day? What are we doing that day?
So the National First Ladies' Day ceremony will take place at 10 o'clock in the morning on April the 29th. Of course, it's a Saturday. We've chosen the last Saturday of every April, as we wanted it to be a day where people would be off of work. And it's close to the date when Martha Washington became First Lady, which was on April the 30th of 1789. So on National First Ladies' Day this year, we will have a ceremony that will be filled with patriotic music and some speeches about the First Ladies, and a challenge for us as Americans to go out and roll up our sleeves to help make the nation a better place, much as Massee referred to, as we've seen the First Ladies do time and time again with so many different projects. And our project in Marshfield this year we're going to do some work on the cherry blossom trees. So I think we'll plant a cherry blossom tree and do some beautification work. And so I think, you think of Lady Bird Johnson, of course, when you think of beautification across America. But I know Massee would emphasize this as much as anybody else on the commission. We do not just want to see this happen in Marshfield. This is to be a national call to service. And most national holidays, we're called to stay home from work. The bank is a banking holiday. And this is a rare occasion. We're called to go out and to work, to roll up our sleeves and to do something to better our community. And I hope civic clubs, faith-based organizations, school organizations of all kinds will get active as we see this roll along year after year, and we'll do great projects that will help. And what better way to honor these women who have given so much to the service of the nation?
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, that's what I would say with this show. I said the things that make us feel good and the people who, are making the world a better and more interesting place. I mean, as you know, I'm like all about what kind of volunteering and service. So it's what we get along. Now, what's this Massee about you singing?
He has a great voice.
Do tell. Well, I mean, hearing his voice, I'm like, you have a great voice for radio. I'm thinking, okay, probably, good singer.
Massee, can I brag on you for a minute?
Go ahead.
Alison, if you ever get a chance to go on his Facebook page, there is a recording of he and his mother singing "Ring the Bells" at Christmas in their church, which I believe your mother was the song leader. Is that correct in your church, Massee? Right. And it's a Christmas tradition in our home, has been since we've become friends with Massee, to listen to them sing that song. It's amazing. He undersells himself.
What are you? You're going to be singing on the 29th? Is that the event? Yes.
Yes, Allison. You know, Nicholas has graciously asked me to sing "God Bless America," so I'm going to sing "God Bless America."
Yes.
See, you find all these like multi-talented, wacky people in this event, and it's just grown and grown and grown. Now, you also have a thing which I got pulled into the Hubble. Get this, the Hubble medal of what's it initiative, the Hubble
Yeah.
initiative, and
Yeah.
I have one. I have a Hubble medal, and this is wonderfully wacky because you say, well, what on earth is Marshfield famous for? The Hubble telescope. What?
That's right.
Of the Hubble, there's a model of the Hubble telescope. It's in the town square because, yes.
Hubble was born here. It's our claim to fame. A few years ago, NASA began to have these discussions about discontinuing the funding of the Hubble telescope, and we panicked. So we thought we've got one claim to fame and we're about to lose it. And so we thought, what are we going to do to keep Hubble's name alive in Marshfield? So that's when the idea was born to give out the Hubble Medal every year to outstanding Americans who had shown great initiative in their chosen field, which covers a great deal. So that's a big dinner at the festival, as you know, every year. The Hubble dinner, where we present the awards for the year, and we always are excited to see people like Alison return who are former recipients. We take a big picture at the end of everybody. That's the cattle call picture. Everybody gathers together that's received the medal, and that's how we have chosen to honor Hubble. And I mentioned Lady Bird Johnson a while ago. She was the first recipient of the medal for beautification when we planted our cherry blossom trees, because she was so instrumental in giving advice and offering suggestions. And so Lady Bird was the first recipient, and a delegation from Marshfield went to Austin, Texas, and presented it to Mrs. Johnson, and that was really special. And I felt kind of like an idiot. I gave this whole presentation to her about Edwin Hubble, and she had a stroke and she was not communicating verbally very well, but was able to write things down. And she was politely listened, and then she wrote out on there on a piece of paper that she was very familiar with the Hubble telescope through the Johnson Space Center, and went through this big explanation, and I felt about as high as an ant. But she was the first recipient.
Johnson Space Center, buddy. I know.
Duh.
And then there's the Carter family that you're also involved with, because again, like I said, this event, this cherry blossom thing is bananas. They have shows. There was the show about, and then you had the one woman show, and I wound up interviewing her on this show, where she was the woman who taken care of Jimmy Carter as a child, and she did a one woman show about that woman's life. This actress, an incredible thing. She does all sorts of it. But you've been involved. Many of the Carters have been at Cherry Blossom over the years. Again, more presidential relatives, and so now, aren't you on their board as well?
I'm on the board of the Rosalind Smith Carter Childhood Garden in Plains, Georgia, which is in the lot next to the house where Mrs. Carter grew up, and they are replanting many of the plants that she would have been familiar with as she was growing up. And it's an educational opportunity for students to come and to learn. And Mrs. Carter, at an age when she could have retired, decided we needed to have a national conversation about the pollinators and the butterflies, that they were dying in mass number. So she started the Rosalind Carter Butterfly Trail. And I just am fascinated with that, because, the bees and the butterflies have so much to do with pollination and our food supply, and lots of different avenues you could go down. So it's great that the students are able to visit this childhood garden and learn about Mrs. Carter's initiative, and to see so much nature come to life to them. And there have been a large number of students who've just recently started visiting the garden as it's being developed. And it's really exciting to serve. And I'll add this to your comment about the Carters. James Carter, President and Mrs. Carter's grandson, serves with Massee and I on the National Commission. He's the only descendant on the commission whose first lady is still living. And so that's kind of interesting to hear him during our meeting say something about, my grandmother, and oh yeah, he's still talking to her on the phone and things. They're still connected. Yeah. But our relationship with Plains, Georgia is very special. Our Cherry Blossom Festival and the Peanut Festival there, we are sister festivals. And I did not know
you could have that. You have sister festivals.
Yeah, we're sister festivals, okay. And they send people here to help us and support us. And we've sent people there. In fact, speaking of Massee singing, he sang at the Sister Festival signing ceremony in Plains, Georgia. And it was a very historic signing for both of our towns. So after we had that signing, we made a commitment that we would do something to support Plains, Georgia, and their effort to preserve the history of the Carters. So that's when we began hosting the Rosalind Carter luncheon at the festival. And this year, James Carter is being interviewed about his grandmother.
Oh, fantastic.
And all the proceeds from that luncheon go to benefit the childhood garden in Plains.
Now you have so many parties and things at this event. There's always various. There's a tea and there's a party. Isn't there a piano recital as well
Yes.
this year?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
This is the third year we've done the piano recital, and it's fascinating. We had a luncheon today at the Missouri Governor's Mansion to kick off cherry blossom season, as our Missouri First Lady is the honorary chairwoman. And some of the pianists were there and played the Missouri Waltz. It's 12 pianists, one organist, all playing simultaneously. And it's called the First Lady's Piano Concert in honor of our state's First Ladies. And we've done that now for, as I mentioned, 3 years. So that's kind of one of the concluding events. So I always say cherry blossom time is kind of unique to describe, but it's like you put history in a blender and it blows up for several days.
That's what it is. That's what, like
Yeah.
I said. I mean, it was Mary McDonough of the Walton said,
Yeah.
you need to come to this. I'm like, oh yeah, sure. No. You really need to come to this. And she said, I can't explain it to you. I can't explain it to you. You just have to come to this
Yeah.
thing. And she starts rattling. I'm going, okay, your story makes no sense. Presidential descendants, hee-haw, Walton, what? And she's like, just get on the plane. Just get on the plane.
One of my favorite memories of the Cherry Blossom Festival is Mary visiting with George McGovern and watching this interaction of our culture, from politics to the Waltons, come to life together. George Cleveland said at the first Cherry Blossom Festival, on his way home, he was on the plane and someone said, "Where have you been?" He said, "Marshfield, Missouri." Said, "Why would you go there?" He said, "Well, how do you explain to somebody, one, that you're Grover Cleveland's grandson, and you've spent the weekend with the Munchkin from The Wizard of Oz and Thelma Lou from the Andy Griffith Show, and not sound like you've been drinking?"
I auctioned off cherry pies with
Yes.
Cleveland. We had the cherry pie auction, and
You're always a pie model.
And then I went and heard Tinkerbell speak at a panel, and I was like, I'm hallucinating all of this, and this was all at the same place. It's absolutely fascinating. I know. I try to explain it to people, and go, Alison's crazy, but no, this is actually a thing that happens, and this event, this is just incredible. So this is big. This is you really launching this nationwide with the presidential relatives. Now it's the First Lady's pitch. They're getting the full coverage. What's next? Which I shudder to ask. What's next?
But I will say, and I think it's safe, and Massee would say this as well, we want to see National First Ladies Day become a national holiday, to be officially declared. So, call your congressman, beat the bushes, do whatever you can to make it happen. But we've been acknowledged by the national calendar people as a day, which is our first step. But we really want to see this happen. And so this ceremony this year is really a unique moment in history, because if you attend, you'll be able to say someday, I was at the kickoff for that national holiday. And we really, really hope that it'll happen someday, and we're working to make that happen. And
but
I believe it will.
Not such a holiday like to say, okay, we're going to go sit on the porch and drink beer because we don't have to go to work, but day of service, more like when we think of like Arbor Day and Earth Day, where it's about doing something to help other people.
Yes, correct. That's correct. And it's nationwide. And I can't stress that enough. Marshfield is a unique place to have the national kickoff because we're the center of the nation. And my opinion is it should start there and then just take off all over the place. And I hope that we see that happen. We need more days where we celebrate the history that unites us and not that divides us. And First Ladies Day is a bipartisan day where we celebrate all the women who've served in that role. Even James Buchanan, our bachelor president, had a White House hostess in his niece, Harriet Lane. So there are many women to celebrate throughout history. Their contributions have been great, and we as commission members are excited to see this come to life.
Now, I was reading about Buchanan because it's not just, she's the wife. The role, the job of First Lady is basically unpaid ambassador and all of these things was so huge that you said the one president wasn't married was like, I got to get my niece on. Like, did somebody bring my niece in here? Because someone has to do this. I can't just say, oh gosh, I don't have a wife. I guess we're not doing the First Lady thing. He had to go hire somebody to come in and do it.
Well, and interesting you say that. At the lunch I mentioned today, Mary Jean Eisenhower was the speaker, and she made a comment that when her grandmother, Mamie Eisenhower, was first lady, she had a staff of one,
Oh,
social
yikes.
secretary of one. Mamie answered all of the letters that came into her, and it was the role of the social secretary to type them up. But Mamie was coordinating the state dinners and doing all of these things. And now you look at the East Wing, and we have a staff of maybe 30 plus, who knows how many. But you think about people like Mamie Eisenhower and some of those earlier first ladies, they really accomplished a great deal with very limited resources. Eleanor Roosevelt, who was the eyes, ears, and legs of Franklin Roosevelt all over the nation, and still had a limited staff and worked continuously with projects. I think she probably thought of things in her sleep. They've all been dedicated and passionate women, and they've not only served us while in the White House, but have continued to serve us when they leave. And I think that's fantastic, because they could just say, hey, I've had enough. I've done my time. Leave me alone. But that's not what they've done. And I think that's admirable.
Absolutely.
So yeah, this is fascinating. So I guarantee you half the people watching is going, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I didn't know that either. So obviously I will be there on the 29th. We'll try to get other people there. I will make sure this show goes out all over the place. I'm so looking forward to meeting you, just being there with everybody and seeing the whole gang. And it looks like you've got some new people. You got some of the Roy Rogers folks coming. You got
we've got Jerry Mathers coming this year. First time Jerry's been with us. Some of the Waltons are coming back. Of course, all of our Little House friends.
Huge gang of Prairie. You have a big gang of Prairie folks descending upon you. Yes.
You know that you're a festival regular when we name an event after you, Allison. So
I do.
When we have Nellie's Breakfast.
Breakfast. It's the Nellie Breakfast.
You've made it. There you go.
And Allison, people love you. I mean, they do. They love you. I mean, it is a known fact. I mean, you think about Little House on the Prairie, and you can't think about it without remembering Nellie. So,
which is great, because I spent 10 years where people kind of hated me. So
well, and I've told you,
you
said Mary McDonough spoke to you about the festival. Mary contacted me several times and said, you need to invite Alison Arngrim to the Cherry Blossom Festival. And I would say, she's so mean. And she would say, no, she really is a good person. And, you are just a great actress, Allison, because you are one of the most wonderful people. And so I'm sorry it took us so long to invite you.
I scared the Reverend Inman. Okay, that goes in my next book. I'm so scary. I scared the Reverend, who's not scared of much. All right. I'm so glad you guys came on my show. This is just the kind of stuff I'm talking about. And quick, the websites. Where do we get hold of you and find out more about all of this?
Matthew, you go first.
Yes, if they want to learn about the Society of Presidential Descendants, go to www.societyofpresidentialdescendants.org.
That's easy.
And the Cherry Blossom Festival is cherryblossomfest.com. There's a link there that'll tell you about First Ladies Day, or you can visit us on social media on Facebook, Missouri Cherry Blossom Festival in Marshfield, MO.
And I still think somebody needs to make a documentary about you, because your whole story and all this crazy stuff you do is just like
crazy. There you go.
What? But it somehow works. All right. Well, I'm going to see you guys really, really soon. All right. And thank you so much for coming, and thank everyone for watching. I'm Alison Arngrim, and this is the Alison Arngrim Show.
I found my way home across the Grand Mirage.